Good morning. Okay, so uh, we are getting close to our first test time, and the test is going to um, cover the animal behavior, the ecology, and the beginnings of the classification for phylogeny. Okay, so it's usually I go through Platyhelminthes or Nematode. And then after that, I started up. So it's going to be a little bit split up, but it's very similar to what we had on the quiz. So it's nothing too surprising.
Are we able to look back at the previous quizzes and not like shut down?
I, can you see them now? Well, I'll make sure that you can look at them. Yeah. Um, so you'll have a time limit on that, but it will be over the weekend. And again, due to all the programs on our computer on Canvas, we're able to detect most forms of cheating. I don't really, I don't really worry about that too much because it's your choice on that, and I treat you like adults who actually want to be here. Uh, don't talk to each other about the tests. We'll go over it. You'll get the answers at the end. Um, as of right now, it's multiple choice and matching and fill in the blank kind of stuff. Later on, when we get done with the phylogeny section, there will be an essay, a short answer one. But up until then, we're just going to get more regurgitation than anything else. With the test, you don't use your notes. Okay. But uh, I'll have more information how that's going to go in a little bit. But I got to set it up and then we'll be able to do it. Okay. So we're going to finish up nematode and go to mollusca today. So we talked about heartworms last time and there, how they damage the heart quite a bit. And this is a mosquito passage infection. I want to emphasize this thing about mosquito-borne infections because this is my wheelhouse. In my master's, I worked on West Nile spreading throughout the state because I helped set up the network that we can detect West Nile. We've had two West Nile deaths in Wisconsin in the last month because we've had a surge in that. It's a low percentage thing, but that was a newly infectious, emerging infectious disease in the US. It wasn't here before. It was brought over by infected mosquitoes, went into the Bronx or Queens, New York. I can never remember which borough it was, and it spread across the US in 3 years. Now, why is this important? We have to understand that where mosquitoes are is not always where they will be, as in these species can change. And with the species changing brings in new infectious diseases. Heartworm, other parasite associated illnesses that are spread by mosquitoes. There are viruses that are caused by that. Heck, we've even had some local malaria in South Florida for the first time in literally over 100 years. We used to have malaria even this far north in the UP of Michigan. If you've read Little House on the Prairie, things like that, they had malaria. Okay, it's a good one to read, not because we have to put our lenses of what we understand as moral there, but it tells us how things work. We don't have malaria currently in the US because we did a very extensive mosquito abatement program. It might not have been the safest for the environment, but it's gone and we just have to live with it. But the malaria can come back because there's changes in the types of mosquitoes. We have dengue, also known as bone break fever. Okay. In this country, we even have a little Zika. It's a little spice once in a while. Okay. And it's hidden in other outbreak infections because we're not detecting it well enough. Why am I really on that? Is that we already have infectious diseases here that are spread in animals, to humans, and cycle between them. Heck, we had a guy over in Maine, or Vermont, whatever, Northeast, that got 3 different mosquito-borne viruses all at the same time, and he was in the ER or the intensive care unit. I think he might have died. He had West Nile, Eastern equine encephalitis, and St. Louis encephalitis, which that's like hitting the worst lottery ever. It is rare to get one. It's even rarer to get another one. And the third one, what in the world? But we're going to see that more often as these are more common and there is warmer winters out there. We used to be very safe here because it would kill off a lot of the mosquitoes overwintering because we were getting down to -20. The old school way to measure it was -40, but they've changed the measurements since then. I still remember a couple of years we had -70 in central Wisconsin. We don't get those anymore here. So therefore it allows more things to move northward or survive farther north. We are going to see more mosquito-borne illness across the board. So that's my little soapbox for today as the infectious disease specialist here. Is there is a trend and it's not a good trend. I wish I could say winter is coming and it's going to kill all these things, you know, Jon Snow kind of thing, but winter is not coming enough or fast enough to kill all these things off. So there is a trend. And anybody who wants to go into the healthcare profession and become one of the more challenging doctors, which is an infectious disease doctor, you're going to have a lot of interesting and new things to deal with. It's never going to get boring for you. I'll tell you that. Okay, so that being said, you can get excited about infectious disease, maybe not throwing things. We finished off by saying that this is a cycle between cats and dogs and a mosquito. So there's a life cycle. And these are easily treatable with some anti-parasite heartworm pills that you can give your cat or dog, and you should do those regularly. And it is throughout the US, whether or not you see it or not, there are plenty of feral animals that will get it and farm cats and dogs. So it is there. It's considered what we call endemic, ENDEMIC. And endemic means that it's always there. It's just going to have rises and increases and decreases with that. Okay. So one of many, but it's important to remember that we can have infectious diseases that will usually cycle through animals that will then infect us. Heartworm doesn't seem to be one of those, but there's many others where if we have an increase in the animals, it might bleed over to us when we are infected directly or through mosquitoes. West Nile virus, obviously not a multicellular organism, but West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis, Western and Eastern equine encephalitis, lacrosse encephalitis, all of those are examples of that. When it amplifies in an animal population, it can bleed over to us. And so there's an really important public health screening possibility. We have to detect it and warn the doctors that it might be a diagnosis or a potential diagnosis. So the veterinary clinics are a really important way to screen for this and let the public health know that they're getting positives in large animals or dogs or cats or whatever, so they can be aware that the hospitals might not start seeing it in humans. Okay. Again, it was a little off topic. This is Ascaris, also known as human lungworm. I'm not going to pad this one for you. It's a bad disease. This is the adult. It looks boring. The ones you got sent around are kind of undersized, but they go from about 7 inches to 12 inches, full adults, and they pack your intestine full of these worms. It is not just one. These are dioecious worms, so there's a male and a female. They don't really have that much difference between them. They look like they look pretty boring. They can cause intestinal ruptures because of so many worms in your intestines that it blocks the flow and causes a rupture, which is very obviously deadly. You need to have a bowel obstruction surgery to cut out sometimes whole parts of your bowel or at least take them out. Unless you have a strong stomach, do not look this up on YouTube. Okay. So, these worms are also known as lungworms because of part of their life cycle. This is again a child that is looks really well fed, but that's all the worms that are kind of causing their intestines to bulge outward. And this is the best picture I can get of it. These are the intestinal blockages. It's bowel resection where they just had to cut it out. This is the only picture I can get. It's scanned off of an old photograph. There's no digitals of this besides this, where two doctors, surgeons, Doctors Without Borders in Africa, took and did surgeries on an entire African village. And this is what they got of worms from 70 some people in that village. It's an enormous pile. And this is a 5-gallon carboy that usually is used for fermentation of beer that somebody has at a lab. And this is very common to find in many places. I know when I was teaching at La Crosse, they had a big one like this. They taped it down like to keep them inside or something. But this is a Sigma Aldrich catalog of 1999. I recognize it, and that's really sad that I know that by visual. But that book is about this thick. So this is a large carboy full of our Ascaris. They are big on quantity, right? Parasites of quantity. And you can find them very easily in pigs, especially in this country. My mom, she was the first one to go to college because she got a Fulbright scholarship. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to afford it. And she got a biochemistry degree out of Madison. And she took a parasitology class there, and they got fresh samples of parasites, especially Ascaris, from the Oscar Mayer hot dog factory down the street. Cook your hot dogs. I'm just saying. The reason being is that the lungworm means that part of its life cycle is the adults live in the intestine. The larva will crawl through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream, hang out, have a interesting childhood, but when they're about to develop into adults, what they'll do is go to the lung, burrow out of the alveoli, crawl up the trachea, and you'll cough and swallow them in your sleep. And so they'll go through the stomach and go to the intestine. That's where they live. Most of the eggs go out in the feces. So that's the lungworm. Now, a truly interesting story is in 2012, Haiti had an enormous, that's in the Caribbean. Haiti had an enormous earthquake that basically wiped out their whole infrastructure. It devastated a jewel of the Caribbean. And they had no water purification, they had no sewer treatment, everything was the same. Still is. It's just horrifying. We put lots of aid, but you can't build up an entire country. It's just very difficult. So we made sure to have them come over as immigrants because they were fleeing basically a destroyed country. We do this for multiple countries around here, which is why Haitians are legal immigrants into this country because they don't have anywhere to go without dying. So somebody helped out, went and tried to do humanitarian aid. Many people do in Haiti, when it's safer to. It's not too safe right now, but somebody did this and came back in New York, and this was on Monsters Inside Me from Animal Planet. It was great. I love that show. But she had a fever and she started throwing up a whole bunch and coughing up all these larvae. It turns out the fever was driving all the larvae out of her system. They were trying to get out, and the coolest place was the lung. I'm pretty sure when she started coughing up a whole bunch of these larvae that she needed a therapy treatment for decades. I think I would not be stopping, but it found an infection she didn't know about. Now, it turns out this is starting to be more common. The CDC it says it isn't as common, but I've had students in my clinical micro that have come in and said, "Hey, I got infected from this over the break because I was at my boyfriend's pig farm." Okay, or this just, and I'm not kidding about this. This just came out of my brother's butt, and they have a picture on a Kim wipe or on a Kleenex, and it, yeah. So these things are more common because of this. I'm not a real big fan of parasites, but my stories are starting to increase with this. So this is not a good one. Human lungworm, and I emphasize human for the next section. But the overall life cycle is that you live in the intestine as an ascaris. It has this not so great arrow that shows going to the lung. It's in the peripheral blood system. So then it goes to the lung. Okay. Now, some of the problems are when it damages the lung, it can go other places in the body, maybe not as much as tapeworms, but it sometimes has problems in when you're having holes in your intestine, you can have sepsis because you have 10 to the 13th bacteria in there. And once it gets access to the bloodstream, you can have bacteria in the blood, which is sepsis. That's not a good thing to be on your diagnosis because it's hard to survive those. Okay. Also, it's hard to diagnose everything that's going on if you have multiple infectious diseases going on at the same time. But I'll keep that for clinical micro. And if anybody wants to take clinical micro, it's a fun time. I just talk about every infectious disease. Okay, so overall, the roundworm is a little bit different because it has an organization that we didn't have before. We have a one-way digestive tract. It's nothing special. It's a tube within a tube. But I want to point out some things that are going to really be similar going forward in the anatomy. So we have something called the pharynx, which is kind of the opening. We had a pharynx in that flatworm, but this is a little bit different. It's internal, it doesn't go out. And then we have the stomach, it's very small, and then we have this intestine that goes to the anus. Okay, so we have reproductive organs. That is one of the first things that is very organized in these multicellular animals. But we have an excretionary pore, which is something a little bit different. We can get out more ammonia out of here. I would like to point out the nervous system. It has an organized nervous system. It isn't just a ladder anymore. It has a dorsal, so the top and ventral section, and cross nerves that go across all this. So it's a lattice work around everything. And it has something like a brain. Note its location. It's a circle with little nodes around the pharynx here. And you're going to see this in mollusca as well. and a number of the other developmental, more developmentally organized anatomies coming up. But this is the first time where you're really seeing an organized nervous system instead of just kind of haphazard. So a big step up in development, in organization, and the ability to infect. Now, there's also this gap. We have the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and then we have this gap, and this tube is the endoderm. So this is that pseudocoelom. You're just seeing it in cross section. Okay, I'm emphasizing the difference between the acoelomate, the pseudocoelomate, and the coelomate. Might be on the test. Just saying. Now, sometimes they don't stretch out and crawl everywhere. Sometimes they just live in a hole. And this one you can see is a male because it has these little spicules coming out. And those are a male part. But sometimes they live in a cyst. Protected, sometimes organized to control the environment. Which brings us to our next species, Trichinella or trichinosis. You get this from contaminated pork almost exclusively. So if you don't cook your pork, you could get it. In general, you cook things that have pig in it because it's very similar to us physiologically, and a lot of the diseases transfer very easily. So cook your pork. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a pork chop or bacon. Just cook it. Okay? So what happens is you ingest this and it insists in the muscle of the pig. The capsule around it breaks down, but it doesn't kill the worm. What will happen is the larva from that worm that survives in the intestine will go past the intestinal barrier, go through the blood, and go to your muscles. Now, the muscle cell is interesting because everybody's born with a certain amount of muscle fibers. When you exercise, cells will fuse with that muscle fiber and make it larger, and that's how you get swole. Okay? But the muscle fibers themselves, there's a set number. So genetically, some people are a little bit more predisposed to gain muscle weight and such like that, males versus females. So after hormones hit at 10 to 13, males and females change very drastically in their fast twitch muscles, their skeletal system, their muscle density. So after that point, males have, unfortunately, a very distinct advantage with physical prowess, I guess you'd say. That isn't to say that women don't have the ability to do athletics, but it is a very different competition level. That aside, you're built with a certain amount of muscle fibers. Why do you care about that? If this trichinosis goes into there, it specifically infects muscle fiber cells. And then it turns off all the genes that make it a muscle fiber cell and turns it into a cell called a nurse cell, which you do not see in the body anywhere. It's in a unique cell that the parasite uses or makes through playing with the gene expression of your own body. It plays it like an organ, a pipe organ. So it ceases to be a muscle cell. So you have one less muscle fiber. If you have a lot of these, you have a lot less or fewer, both muscle fibers. And what about the heart? That's all muscle too. So if you get a super infection in this, you can have paralyzed intestinal muscles because there's muscles around your intestine making sure it moves. You can have damages and ruptures to your whole muscle groups and ripping. You can have heart attacks and damage to your heart permanently. So this is a bad infection. Cook your pork. Now, the nice thing is that, and central nervous system. I keep forgetting about that. The brain part is not good. So you cook your pork, you don't get trichinosis, everybody's happy, right? 1 out of 30 that you could get by humans is not guaranteed, or guaranteed not to get it if you cook it. Because you could eat it even if the pork is has it in there, as long as it's cooked. You won't even know, usually. But this is a picture of the muscle fibers. You can see those long striations, and then you can see how different the cell is that has the trichinosis in it. It's very, very different. And it also disrupts the whole muscle itself. It's not streamlined. It's not going to contract as well, apparently. So, kind of an important one. That one would be for life, as in you will not grow that back. You can get treated for it, but yeah. So the only thing I'm going to talk about pinworm is that in the future, if you're so blessed with family, is that kids will eat sand. Sand is used by feral cats and raccoons, and they can have pinworms. Pinworms are a very small worm, and it is not as much deadly as it's very annoying because everybody in the family usually gets it, and it has to be treated, and they have to clean everything, steam clean all the clothing and the bedclothes and stuff like that. It spreads. Now, the way you test for it is weird. You go in about a half hour after the kid's asleep and look at their butt. You take a little piece of tape on a tongue dispenser and then touch it against the anus, because that's where the eggs are laid. The females will go out after the kid is asleep, lay eggs around the opening, and go back in. So the kid gets a really itchy bum and it spreads it that way. Okay. And what you can do is the tape will catch a whole bunch of the eggs. You flip that down over a microscope slide, and I guarantee you the doctor does not know very much about microbiology at all. They get one class if you're lucky. So general practitioners do not know much about microbiology at all. Infectious disease specialists do. But they don't identify it. The people at the lab identify it. And it's just a ton of eggs. And then you get special drugs that everybody takes at the same time so it doesn't keep cycling, and you wash everything in especially hot treated laundry, and then it goes away. But it is a fact of life. You can be as clean as you want, but kids will still put things in their mouth. This is one that I'm very blessed to say we have not gotten, but I had nightmares about this possibility. I am not going to show you any pictures. You're welcome. Okay. However, who has a dog or had a dog growing up? Oh, good. This one will hit home. Hookworm is primarily a dog disease. Dogs poop on the ground. Even if you pick it up, you'll have this transfer. Now, they have something that's called a hookworm, and it sits in the intestine. It nibbles on the intestine, sticks in the mucus, and sucks the blood from that wound. It's not healthy for the dog. They usually lose weight and have other possibilities for infectious diseases. But if you're taking it to the vet regularly and give it deworming medicine, it's usually fine. But it can passage through the feces and actually eat its way into your foot. I will show pictures of why that is, but the rhabdiform larva will actually eat into the foot pad of the dog. Also, dogs eat poop. They're just, think about that. What it licks, what it eats, and then you try to give it a kiss. Just saying. Yeah. Okay. Just saying. I love dogs, but I'm not gonna let it lick me on the face. Now, they're very small, right? And we usually only have localized infections compared to dogs. But it can go, and look, this little dotted line, it goes from the stomach to lung. So this one can get out through the lung and get coughed up at sleep, swallowed without you thinking about it, and live in your intestine. Usually doesn't get that far. It's usually a localized in the foot, but it's kind of nasty. So you'll have this kind of worm tracing as it's causing inflammation throughout the foot. Sometimes it can spread that way. Now, this is what it looks like when it's pulled out of the blood. That small vial that's going around, that's basically the size of a hookworm. Okay. Actually, it's longer. That's the one's the filiform. I'll back off on that. I don't know why I don't have any. I'm gonna get some hookworms for you guys. I will. So they stick on the intestine, and look, it's smiling at you. Look at those teeth. I want to point out it actually has those teeth. It's made out of sugar. Okay, and a sugar is very, very tough. It's rivals, depending on the type of it, rivals enamel and how strong it is. It's called chitin. And chitin is also what's on the outside shell of lobsters and insects and such like that. But it isn't bone, but it's just a repeating sugar that tightly packs together. Pretty crazy. But it uses that as an advantage to eat through things. So the first tooth without a jaw. Okay. So, this is one of many reasons why your proctologist should be paid pretty well. When you're doing a colonoscopy, you do not want to have to back up and see this. This is a full adult where you can see it's attached in the mucus and it's gnawing away at the intestinal wall to get that sweet, sweet blood. But if there's a hole in that barrier between 10 to the 13th bacteria and your bloodstream, you can get sepsis very easily. So you'll have blood in your stool, you'll have sepsis sometimes. It's not good. So you need to get treated. Now, I will put a story in there. My brother is an electrical engineer. He does not like all these flesh bag kind of wet, disgusting biology things, but he got a dog or rescued a dog, and he was very proud of it. And great. But then he called me up one day. I was getting on the highway, and he's going, "So what do you know about hookworm?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" And then I started laughing, and it was not a good laugh because I was going to drop some horrible knowledge on him. His dog had turned up positive for hookworm, and he had had it home for like a week and a half. So it was already in his household. It was great. So I got to tell him all this stuff, and there was a long pause after I told him all this stuff. And he used some descriptive phrases. And he said, "Are you kidding me?" Abbreviating what he said. Yeah, I got to tell him the wonders and horrors of parasites. And I may have laughed in a very unpleasant tone. But yeah, they got his dog treated. It needed 2 treatments and they tested for it, but they were able to treat it. The dog was healthy and nobody else got it because they were caught in it. Okay. So they come in all sorts of forms. Questions on that? Okay. Last one. Elephantitis. This one we hope to wipe out. Yeah, I'm ending on a happy note, guys. The World Health Organization, or WHO, organizes health responses in disasters, war-torn countries, and infectious disease spread. One of the first victories that we had after 10 or 15 years of vaccination regimens worldwide is to wipe out smallpox. You guys don't know about smallpox? It happened when I was 2. We declared it eradicated from the face of the earth. I sure hope to God, and that is a full prayer, that we never see it again. Because I will be teaching asynchronous and praying for your souls as I make my own vaccine up north. I am not kidding. I do not want to see that one here. We do not have enough vaccine to cover everybody. The Army gets vaccinated against it, but we do not have enough, and we are not resistant to it. It will kill millions. It's considered a biowarfare agent. But the World Health Organization coordinates responses and education and treatment for different diseases. We're trying to wipe out Wucheria bancrofti, which is a long filamentous It's thinner than angel hair pasta, but it lives in your immune system, in your lymph nodes, and you have lymph nodes in your armpits, in your skin, all over the place. But the major joints are a big thing. It takes all the fluid that's around your cells, not the blood, but all the fluids, and drains them back out, and then screens everything coming back out through the lymph nodes where the white blood cells are. So it's part of your immune system. When you have a worm that totally ignores your immune system and sits in there and lives in your lymph nodes, like a major crime unit living very clearly in a police station, things get backed up because this is, while it doesn't look that big, it blocks all the exits. So you get this worm by injection through a mosquito. So the mosquito has part of a reproduction cycle, and the full sexual reproduction happens in the humans. This is important because it needs humans as the intermediate to reproduce. So if we can break this passage here, we can wipe out an infectious disease because it won't be able to reproduce. That's what we've been doing for 4 decades. We've been introducing all over the world where this is, and it isn't here, by the way. Another good reason to be in Wisconsin. But in the tropics, it's especially in Southeast Asia, we are giving out lots of mosquito netting so they don't get these mosquitoes while they sleep. And it has a whole bunch of insecticides on it. We're also trying to detect and treat these immediately so the mosquitoes that bite an infected individual don't pass it on. So we're keeping the infected people away from the mosquitoes and vice versa. And we've gotten down to less than 300 cases in the world every year, which is big. So if we can truly break this cycle for about 5 to 10 years, there won't be any mosquitoes possible that would have it. Because as far as we know, we're the only cycling things. So what does it look like? This is elephantitis. Basically, you have a swelling of the legs because the backup of the lymph. It gets so bad, it kind of looks like a stumpy elephant leg. Okay. There are reports of even larger elephantitis cases where they can barely walk. This is not a really swole calf. He didn't do leg day multiple times. This is lymph buildup. There are reports in World War II of as the Japanese were retreating from the Philippines, they left people with this behind because and they starved to death because they couldn't move around. In males, unfortunately, it tends to really focus on the genitals. Let's just say there's a wheelbarrow involved. But the elephantitis is the reason being is this doesn't look like a human leg or anything anymore. Okay. So it's positive that we might be wiping this one out because we know enough about its life cycle to disrupt it at the correct place. And we need worldwide coordination of this to disrupt this infectious disease. Questions on this? I could keep going with these parasites, but it's giving you an overview. Human and animal infections and some human infections that we definitely have in this country. It's much more likely for a lot of these ingested ones overseas, where they're in certain countries where there are less food and drug protection laws. Okay. So I'm going to go on to mollusca. There's always a kind of a toss up on if I'm going to talk about Annelida, so segmented worms, mollusca, or insects first. And I've decided that I'm going to talk about mollusca for a number of reasons. I'm going back to the same picture. You should be able to say in your own words there's 3 tissue layers. outside, inner, and middle, and that there's a gap in between one of these. And it's a gap in the mesoderm. That's the true coelom. That coelom supports that inner layer, which is the intestines, anything else that develops, and it gives you an area for these organs to develop. So, in theory, by what I just told you, you can say, okay, we should see an increase in complexity of organs inside as we get more of a gap. And that's actually what we see. We barely have an excretion system in this one, the flame cells, with the 3 tissue layers, no coelom, acoelom. We saw start of an intestinal one-way digestive system and some nervous system coordination in the roundworms just now, the pseudo-coelomate. But now we're going to get into the full coelom, and we should start seeing some developmental advances on this internal structure because it has a coelom. So everything past the nematodes will have a coelom. That is a characteristic of them. Okay, so if you're talking about mollusks, annelids, arthropods, echinoderms, or chordates, you can say that this characteristic is shared by all of them, and it is not shared by the rest. Okay, so those advantages are the development of internal organs. We have a liquid-filled area that encompasses around or envelops all these organs. So if you get hit hard or run into something, one of your organs doesn't immediately start bleeding. You have shock resistance because of this liquid in between you and it. And you have the tissues enwrapping it to keep it in place. Okay? Then you have a circulatory system development. You have the room for that. Also, you're getting large enough as an organism that you need something more than just diffusion to get by. You need something that'll deliver nutrients, take away toxic byproducts, and exchange oxygen and CO2 so that all the tissues in every area can survive. You can't just have one area that just doesn't get quite enough oxygen, because that part will die unless it's very specifically developed to live in that environment. Okay, now, not only that, if it's bigger, you can have more of a digestive tract, which means you can absorb more nutrients. That means you can grow and thrive and do more activities. Okay? And if you have that full coelom supporting everything and causing more flexibility, you can have more freedom to move. So you have more varied body forms. Okay? Quick Trip now has raspberry flavoring. Ooh. Yeah, I know. Tell your friends. It's my favorite. So I can get my Kona Dark and flavoring with it. It's beautiful. Quick Trip is the best. Okay, just to remind you where we are now into the coelomates, and everything past here will have a coelom. But now we're into 3 branches that are called protostomes. And protostomes are measuring by a developmental stage. Developmental just means that we're looking at how it changes and grows from a zygote, from that fertilized egg. And there's going to be 2 different groups, protostome and deuterostome. Protostomes are going to be mollusks, annelids, and arthropods. So if you get down to separating out one of these against a sea star or something with a spinal cord, you can say, well, that clam or that insect are protostomes and also coelomates. And the sea star is a deuterostome. Okay, what is the difference here? I'm using a picture from the 9th edition, not because I like the 9th edition, but to point out an error in the 9th edition. And they finally fixed it in the later editions. But in case you rented that one, because it's cheap, I understand. They have some problems, and it's right here. So protostomes and deuterostomes will have some characteristics that I want you to know, and I'll point these out. This is a picture of the 8-cell stage of a zygote. So zygote is a fertilized egg, and it starts dividing, and then it divides again. So the second division, the first division, it makes 2. The second division makes 4, and the third division makes 8. So they'll spread before it gets to a ball. Okay, where are you going with this, Dr. Deagle? Fine. What will happen at the 8-cell stage is you're starting to get, instead of a plane, you're starting to grow in 3 dimensions, right? So what happens when you split those cells will mean that they either stack on top of each other perfectly, like just stacking cups, or they'll turn and sit in these grooves here. And believe it or not, that's actually a significant thing. Now, protostomes will have a spiral split, which means when they double that third time to make 8 cells, they're going to rotate 45 degrees, and the new cells, shown in blue here, will sit in these little grooves. Deuterostromes will not, and it's called radial because it's still spokes on the wheel kind of idea. They'll stack. So what the book says is that it's spiral. It is not. It's radial. That's why I have this here to point out this error. Apparently, enough of us biologists pointed this out that they fixed it, but it took them a couple of years. So if you see this, deuterostromes are radial, radial, because they're still sitting on top of each other. Now, the other word here, determinate or indeterminate. This talks about the fate of the cell. If your fate is not written, it is not guaranteed that it is going to happen. As in, that cell, any one of those cells, doesn't specifically grow into anything. That is indeterminate. If you take one of these cells and you know it's going to be made into the head or heart or circulatory system or something, that's determinate. At the 8-cell stage in protostomes, we can actually go in. You can do this in the lab, in our developmental biology lab. We'll do this in with number of mollusks. And you can take out one cell at the 8-cell stage. If that larva develops, it will miss something significant, like part of its digestive tract or something like that, if it survives. So at the 8-cell stage, each cell has a set future. Its fate is determined as what it's going to be. That's why we call it determinate. But if you take a sea urchin, which is an echinoderm, a deuterostome, at the 8-cell stage and pull off one of those cells, we can do that. It doesn't do anything to the end result. That cell just is replaced and everything develops as normal. So each of these cells does not have a set fate. It's indeterminate, not determined yet. Its fate hasn't been determined. You see the difference? That's important. Next time we'll finish off by or go into this more by saying everybody started out as an anus. Sorry, guys.